Welcome back to the Spectre Creative Channel with me, your host, Scott, ToyGuru Neitlich, 20-year veteran of the toy industry and big toy collector myself. And we're talking about, well, a little bit about mistakes today. Mistakes happen in a lot of things. Mistakes happen in movies, and mistakes happen in TV shows, and mistakes happen when you file your TPS reports. But if you're tuned into this channel, you're probably more interested in mistakes that happen with toys. And some mistakes, like legs falling off or accessories not being included in packaging, are easy to spot. I want to talk about a mistake that I've noticed being a professional in the toy industry, where certain toys need to, I guess for lack of a better word, be sort of sacrificial victims in order for the greater good, the long-term longevity of the line. Okay, let's go with a less offensive picture here. I'm sure that last one probably wasn't too pretty. You know, human sacrifice. This is kind of a human sacrifice, right? All right, bear with me on that. So what am I talking about? Why do toys need to sacrifice themselves? I call this first wave syndrome. And I mean, it's literally something I made up, but I'm going to explain what it is because it occurs. It's just never really been named before. And I've noticed it professionally. So a first wave of any action figure line is a lot like a pilot or a first season of a TV show. Things aren't quite right. The cast may not totally be there. The looks of the characters aren't really refined perfectly. It's often more noticeable in animation than it is with live action because you can actually see that the characters aren't quite on model. I mean, they're there, but if you compare early episodes, pilot episodes, to later ones, there's, color differences and model differences, and not every character is exactly the way they wind up being long term. They get changed kind of quickly, and early versions get discarded. So why am I showing you all of this? It's because the same thing happens in the toy industry all the time. And it's essentially that the first wave of any figure line, especially figure lines that go for a long time, like Marvel Legends or Black Series, DC Universe Classics, the first wave is more or less a sacrificial lamb. It's basically there's going to inevitably be problems with it. So let me show you what I mean by that. When we first did Masters of the Universe Classics, which ran for, more than 10 years. I mean, especially if you count the Super 7 stuff. Well, the very first handful of figures, like He-Man here, he was supposed to look like this. This is how he was supposed to come out. But the first versions came out what I sort of called like drunk after a bender He-Man. Like his eyes had this huge amount of redness to them that was not supposed to be there. The spray mask was too heavy. Not to mention the fact that some of the parts were not assembled correctly. King Grayskull, He-Man, and Skeletor, who were some of the first figures, all suffered from this. In fact, if you look at the shoulders, even though it's not as noticeable because of the way the muscles work as it is in things like Roboto, the shoulders are backwards on the very first release of He-Man, Skeletor, and King Grayskull. They all have the left on the right and the right on the left. Not as noticeable as when this happened with Roboto, where the circuitry is easier to spot, but another example of the very first releases having what I would call those inevitable mistakes. So obviously, these things are corrected. I mean, no one in the long run wants this to happen, but some interesting other kind of mistakes happen with initial waves. So for example, DCU Classics, another wave I worked on at Mattel, the very first wave was supposed to have chase variants like every other wave in the line. In particular, Red Tornado was shown at New York Toy Fair or Comic-Con, I don't recall which, but a modern version of him that had lost sort of the boot and gauntlet extra pieces and had a different paint deco on the borders of the cape. And this version of Red Tornado, while shown, never shipped. The same thing was actually with Etrigan, another figure in the first wave of DCU Classics, although this one wasn't as well known by the fan base because the variant was actually never shown publicly, unlike the Red Tornado variant. In this case, here's a very rare packaged sample where you can see he had a thicker paint around the eyes and the lips, and he had a wash over his skin The idea was this was to give him more of a Jack Kirby look. I'll go to a close-up shot of the face. You can see it a little bit better. And if you have your own Etrigan, you can compare it. It's not as dramatic as even the Red Tornado variant, where, parts were swapped out with the boots and the gloves, but he definitely was supposed to have a chase variant, which never made it. Another notorious example in the toy collecting community was Hasbro's Indiana Jones 3 3/4 wave that came out coinciding with the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull movie. The first releases, if you will, had what are affectionately called derpy eyes, or screwball eyes, where there was too much white, too much paint added, and they just didn't look right. And this happened like over and over again with almost every indie figure. And it was really frustrating for collectors because we've waited a long, long time to get Indiana Jones figures, and he came out looking like a Looney Tune, as a lot of people described him, with eyes that were just like bulging out of his head instead of being that, cool, slick Harrison Ford look that we all would have preferred him to have. And this, again, is first wave syndrome, where the initial wave is going to have mistakes. The other big mistake, other than paint apps and lost chase figures, is the fact that first waves can almost inevitably have essentially, peg warmer status out the gate. And this happens because a lot of major retailers will place their entire annual or semi-annual order for an assortment against one wave instead of spreading it out over the course of many waves. So they get too much of wave 1 and almost none of wave 2 and 3. This hasn't affected toy distributors as much, especially Marvel Legends figured out that by theming all of their waves with different SKUs for the movies and not having one annual assortment has sort of fixed this, especially for Marvel Legends. But I remember with DCU Classics, like Walmart and Target ordered their entire annual supply against the Wave 1 assortment. So, it's kind of like this infamous internet sign about the too many ham sale, where, too much product is ordered and you wind up just clogging the pegs. So yes, you can learn from your mistakes, and Marvel Legends did an amazing job of doing this. But this isn't something where, fans will say, oh, can't you just fix it in post? Can't you just clear the shelves and, bring in new product? And, it doesn't really work like that, because you can't just sort of swoop into every Target and Walmart and, RIP Toys R Us and sort of fix it in post, if you will. It doesn't really work that way. You have to wait for things to sell through. So much like, an early automobile that looks not much like a modern automobile, that's a lot what the first wave of a toy line is like. It's a learning curve. No matter what the product, what the licensed property, what the form factor, what aisle it's meant to be in. And the reason I bring this up for collectors especially is because we are notorious for kind of creating wish lists of characters that we want to see in different lines. And when we hear about a new line coming out, we might immediately say, oh, I hope the first wave has this character, and this character in it, because that would be awesome. And the first wave, a lot of it, it's like picking teams as a kid in sports, where you're drafting and choosing who's going to be on your team. But getting chosen for the first wave is kind of a blessing and a curse. While it might be great because you're going to get a figure of that character early, if that character is in wave 1, inevitably they're going to be a sacrificial victim, if you will, because the chances of something kind of going wrong are exponentially multiplied if they're in wave 1. So you may think you want to quickly get a figure, but you really don't quickly want to get a figure. You would rather get that figure in wave 3, 4, or 5, because the learning curve is thick for toys. It's thicker than, I think, a lot of other products, especially because of all the details. I mean, all those details are painted by hand, and there's so many possible things that could go wrong, from variants getting dropped to incorrect packaging. That's why, again, I've noticed this so much being in the toy industry that I named it, or well, at least I started referring to it as Wave 1 syndrome, where whoever winds up in that first wave inevitably is going to be a sacrificial victim for the sake of the longevity of the line. Variants are dropped, paint apps aren't applied, mistakes happen, and it's kind of like we have to sort of mentally be prepared for this. Obviously it would be great if this never happened, but I just see it over and over again, and not just with one company. I see it with pretty much every toy company out there, ones I've worked for and ones I've just collected from, that those first figures put out, especially the first run of those first figures, are inevitably going to have problems. And it's not like the toy companies are these evil supervillains sitting there like, oh, how can we screw this up for the collector? No, that doesn't happen at all. Of course they don't want this. But making toys, especially articulated action figures, is not at all easy. You're talking about a hand-painted, articulated representation of a character at 6 inches, more or less, or 3 3/4. And, collectors, we thrive on details, and we notice everything. And we have huge expectations, especially when a new line is announced with a new Wave 1, we might have been waiting for. Believe me, we notice every tiny detail. Whereas kids, parents, gift givers aren't really going to pick up on a lot of these things. And as long as the toy works, they're happy. And at the end of the day, 80% of toy sales, even product that we feel is collector oriented, like Black Series or Marvel Legends or DC Universe Classics, toys sold at retail, while we feel they're made for collectors, they're really made for kids, because kids and gift givers are responsible for 80% of the purchases. And for a kid, a mistake in a toy is not a big deal. As long as the toy works and really looks like the figure, they're happy. First wave syndrome is really something that only affects collectors, which is why I wanted to make a video about it. So there you go. What do you guys think? Is this something you've experienced? Are there other examples you've seen of Wave 1 syndrome out there that I may have missed? Leave them in the comments below. Let me know. Give this channel and video a subscription, a like. It helps tell YouTube to share it with more people. And that's what this is all about, sharing toy fun knowledge. All right, see you guys in the next video.